All right, moving forward in the design process. So the last slide, here I go back slide. The last slide we kind of just did an introduction to what we're going to talk about. So we're going to move forward in the design process, and the book does a great job of giving you a good definition explanation of what this design process entails. So I'm going to go at a really high level because you read the book already, right? So you understand what these are. But what I'm going to talk about in the design process, I'm going to talk about how it relates to you working, right, as an individual in the fashion industry, right? So as a designer or a merchant, so whether you're on the design side or the merchandising side, whether you're a pattern maker, a seamstress, a tailor, or a store manager or a buyer, right? You have some input in this process, right? So no matter what your career goal is, right? So think about this in terms of what your career goal is. I want you to think about these steps in the process in terms of what you want to do in the fashion industry. So we start with, identifying the problem, right? We just define and clarify what the problem is. So that problem identification, right? Just what is the problem? What is the problem that I need to solve, right? And in terms of your career choices, or even if you think about it this way, even if you think about developing your design aesthetic for the purpose of this class, because we're going to have some projects we're going to do, the question I'm going to give you is X, right? So what is this asking for you to do? So that's the problem that you're going to have to solve, right? So, so these steps are going to help you with, just your thinking process, right? So you have a problem you need to solve, right? So next, what do you do? In order to solve that problem, you probably need to do some research, right? So you'll examine, the problem in a couple different manners and a couple different ways, and figure out what do you not know that you need to know, right? So do you need to know more about a culture or history? Do you need to find some more inspiration? Do you need to look at fabrics, right? Did you need to look at color trends? Do you need to go outside of your regular thinking, right? Do you look at music? So if we look at this image here on the screen, many of us could have a different explanation to what the inspiration was behind this runway show. Obviously, it's a runway show. What the inspiration behind that runway show was. But if we do a little research, we could get more details, right? So you have to do some research. In this class, you'll have to do some research. You have to go outside of your regular thinking, right? And then you get to the ideation. And that's just determining alternate solutions, and every step in the process, this is really the most important one, because this is when your creativity really comes into play, when you really think of something different. I mean, in all honesty, in many ways, fashion, if you've taken fashion history, if you've taken the fashion history class, you'll see this, but even with looking in your own closet, it's really the same things over and over again in new and exciting ways, right? So determining an alternate solution. I literally, in all honesty, this is just a sweatshirt silhouette, right? But what made it different, right? The graphic nature of it, right? The fabric, actually, it's not a traditional fabric. Actually, it's not a workout fabric at all. This is really just for looking cute because you would sweat like crazy. I sweat like crazy if I really worked out in this. So the ideation, right? So looking at alternatives and looking for new and exciting ways to solve that problem. Okay. Then you move over to what limitations that ideation may have, right? So do you have the time? Do you have the energy? And I want to say, do you have the effort to put forward, right? To get to as we get to the end, get to that presentation piece, right? So looking at the limitations that you might have. So, again, with this class, right? If we look at this class and some of the projects that you're going to have to do in this class, I know you don't know what they are yet, but, time management is a constraint, right? Understanding really how much time you need to develop a well thought out answer. And listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. I have that struggle too, because in all honesty, each one of these modules that I do takes about 8 hours, if I'm lucky. because I make the PowerPoints, I've done my research, I'm out in the world looking at videos to create, and then I'm putting all the pieces together. And sometimes I'm just like, Tara, you need to stop. You don't have any more time, right? So constraints, those limitations. Listen, your modules are awesome, but if this is the only class I was teaching, they would be even awesomer. I just made up a word, right? Because there's just so much that I want to put in that I just can't, because for two reasons. Number one, the time constraint for me, but number two, the time constraint for you, right? This class is only so many hours and there's only so much information that I can give you. So I want to focus and be really intentional with what I give you by curating what actually ends up in the lecture, right? So that constraint identification, okay? And then selection, right? Picking the best option, finally, stepping off the ledge and saying, this is what we're going to do, right? And then once you make the selection, and then it's the implementation. So that's how you have solved the problem. You execute your what you researched, and after looking at the ideation and the constraints, that you go ahead and do it, right? You step off the ledge, right? In order to be a full process, right? So a process is a 360. I probably should have made that a 360 instead of putting the image in there, made it a circular process, right? It's called continuous process improvement. You have to have some evaluation. So you have to, get some critiques, right? And again, in this class, I'm going to give you assignments and I'm going to give you feedback, right? You just don't get a grade. You also will get feedback, right? And then after you're evaluated, you react to the evaluation. And we have to take the good and the bad. Now, I do understand in the world that we live in now that people tend to over criticize because there's not that face-to-face interaction. That's why sometimes when I'm doing the feedback for classes, I'll actually do the video version of it. I'll do it just like this so you can see me. Because sometimes criticism seems overly critical when it's only in a written, in a text version. If it's me talking about the criticism or the evaluation, I'm not even say criticism, the evaluation, it comes across differently. So that evaluation piece is really important. And that's how you get better. You get better by people telling you, these are the things you did great, do more of that. These are the things that you had challenges with. And these are the things that you don't know, so you need to improve on, right? We all get better with evaluation. Me too, me as well. So I challenge the students if you feel like I said the wrong thing, tell me, especially like in exams and quizzes, and particularly not in this class, but in my textiles classes, we have a lot of quizzes, and I'm just like, challenge me if you think I didn't select the right answer, or there's another answer that it could have been, right? That piece. And then part of that is reacting to the evaluation, right? That refinement piece. So, understanding that change is necessary and just how to make and implement those changes. And then finally, you're at the end, you sell the solution, right? So again, the design thinking process is continued, because right after you get to presentation, then you go right back to problem identification. And, in business, we call it continuous process improvement, right? Continuous improvement process. So we're just constantly doing something, researching it, making it better, getting evaluated, starting over. So the design world does the same thing. Absolutely does the same thing. Okay. All right, so moving on into lecture. I know that slide was a lot, but this is the process, and this is what we'll be doing throughout the course in this process. So we'll be looking, when we dive into design theory, we'll be looking at line and form and function and shape. We'll be using these terms in conjunction with those. So it's really important that you know those, and it's really important that, like I said, the textbook gives you some more detail than I give, and they just give it in a different manner. So make sure you have read, let me see what page, those couple pages that is on. I think it starts on probably like on page 2, probably 2 through 6, I believe, are the pages. Make sure you have read the textbook, okay? All right, so moving forward with aesthetic, right? We're going to be talking about developing your aesthetic throughout the class. And before you got to these video lectures, I talked quite a bit about aesthetics. So we'll talk about that philosophy of us determining what is beautiful, what is not, right? What makes us happy, what encourages us. You know, for me, I'm a visual learner, so imagery is really important to me. So I take a lot from art. In my personal life, I speak in a lot of song lyrics. I hate to say it that way, but I use a lot of R&B lyrics and rap lyrics in my regular lexicon, in my conversation, right? It probably too much when my friends like, you speak in rap lyrics, and I speak in rap lyrics from the 80s to the now, right? Because I'm older than all of you, so I was around before the rap was really a thing. Actually, with the introduction to rap, so that aesthetics, like what are the forces that you marry together, right? And you know, the slide in the textbook talks um, about the movement, the Bauhaus movement, and how they marry, you know, craftsmanship and art. And that may not be what you marry, right? So for me, you know, my aesthetic is actually, I don't want to say I'm all over the place. It is defined, but, you know, I draw my inspiration from color. I draw my inspiration definitely from music. I draw my inspiration from historical imagery, because I'm a historian at heart by nature and my undergraduate degree by training. So I have a lot, I draw from a lot of resources. I mean, even for this class, you know, we use this book for this class, but I have at least 6 other books that I'm using just on fashion aesthetics, not even art books, right? Just on fashion aesthetics. So I have a lot of coffee table fashion books that I draw on. So it's that marrying of those forces, whatever those forces are for you. And like I said, we'll be talking about aesthetics. Next chapter, we'll just be talking about aesthetics, and then every chapter going forward, we'll be talking about those things in conjunction with aesthetics. But the Bauhaus movement had an emphasis on, you know, primary colors and geometric shapes. Those things I'm drawn to as well, but I'm also drawn to fluidity and movement of hard objects, if that makes sense. So, so for instance, I'll just pull out my my little pencil case here. I mean, this literally just holds my pencils on my desk. But and actually, I have Post-it notes too. I just don't have any in it. But I love the fact that this is a solid, hard object, but it has fluidity, and it looks like it moves even though it's solid, because it has some depth and texture to it, if that makes sense to you in this case. But those are some of the things that I'm drawn to. I'm drawn to hard objects that look soft. That's a great way to say it. So really hard objects that look soft. And I have several color palettes that I am completely obsessed with. I'm like, I can't buy anything else in this color, right? And the crazy thing is they're both warm and cool. When we get to color theory in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about, you know, color families. So I'm drawn to both warm and cool colors. Okay, all right. Let me just do one more slide before we end this piece up. So last, we're going to talk about the elements and the principles of design, and we'll talk about, literally, we have a chapter on every one of these: line, shape, form, space, texture, light, pattern. We're talking about color for 2 weeks because color is that important. We're going to be talking about color for a while. So on this list it's last, but this isn't the same lineup that we'll be covering in class. But you know, these components, right? These components are the language, really are the language of design. And they're like the ingredients to the recipe. The book makes that analogy. I think that's great. They're like ingredients to a recipe, or they're like the road signs and directions, like they're markers on the things that should guide you. They're guiding principles, right? So you don't have to start from scratch. You are almost there. Okay. All right. So again, this section of the lecture is going to, I'm going to stop this section of the lecture here. And then we'll go back to these elements in the next section.